Good morning, and thank you for joining this webinar from Wiltshire Council about the potential road route options that could serve a new development to the south and east of Chippenham, which we are calling the Future Chippenham project. My name is Richard Walters and I'm the head of Wiltshire Council's Major Projects and Enabling Service, and I will be chairing today's webinar. I do hope that you'll forgive the rather impersonal nature of this form of consultation event, which of course is imposed upon us by the current pandemic. We're very keen to reach as many people as possible with our consultations, even in these difficult times. And so we hope that the webinars enable you to access further information on this important project for Chippenham. If you wish to see closed captions of speakers' words, then please click on the CC button on the bottom right of the screen, and they should appear after 30 seconds or so. The system does take a little time sometimes to get warmed up. If you're having technical problems, the most common solution is to switch it off and on again. So please close Teams or your browser, reopen it and click on the meeting link again that was sent through earlier. Other problems may be down to your home internet connection. If you're hearing an echo, it could be that you have this event open in 2 or more windows. The event will take the form of a presentation from our panelists, who will explain a little bit about the wider context of the Future Chippenham project and the details about the 3 potential road route options that we're currently consulting on. This will be followed by a questions and answers session. The presentation should take around 40 minutes, with a further 20 minutes or so for questions and answers. Our panel today are Simon Hendy from Wiltshire Council, Jamie Adkins and Thomas Tremlett from Atkins Global. Simon is Wiltshire Council's Director of Housing and Commercial Development and will be presenting a brief overview of the project, setting the wider context of the 3 road options that we are currently consulting on. Jamie is a Senior Engineer and Thomas Tremlett is a Senior Environmental Consultant, both at Atkins Global, who've been appointed as consultants working on behalf of the Council on this project, and will be presenting a more detailed overview of the road route options. Thank you very much to those of you who've already submitted questions in advance. I'll be putting these to the panelists in the questions and answer session. Where the issues raised have been dealt, where the issues have not already been dealt with in the presentation. In addition to the presentation team, there are also subject experts on call who I will be directing questions to where appropriate. There is an opportunity for those of you watching and listening in at the current time to raise questions during the presentation. To ask a question in this way, you need to submit them using the Q&A panel in this webinar. You should be able to see slides on your screen with a Q&A panel to one side. For some of you, the Q&A panel may be beneath the slides and you'll need to scroll down to see it. If you cannot see the Q&A panel, you may need to click on the icon of the 2 overlapping speech bubbles to open this panel. Given the volume of questions that we've already received, it's likely that we will not be able to get round to dealing with too many further questions in the time allotted. With this in mind, we are looking into arranging an additional consultation webinar, which will follow a slightly different format to allow more time for interactive Q&A. But please be assured that all questions submitted are recorded and written responses will be provided after this session, along with a copy of the presentation slides. These will be emailed out to all those who've registered to attend the webinar. A video recording of the webinar will also be made available on the Council's YouTube channel. Lastly, we would very much encourage everyone to actively take part in this consultation and give us your feedback on the road route options. If you can, please help us to spread the word about this consultation and encourage others you know who may be interested to give us their feedback too. The Future Chippenham team and the Council's customer services are happy to provide hard copies of the consultation materials to those people who may not have digital access. So that's it from me for now, and I'm going to hand over to Simon Hendy for the first part of this presentation.
Thanks very much, Richard. The first thing we want to do is to make very clear the distinction between 2 consultations that are taking place at the moment. Wiltshire Council's Local Planning Authority is currently consulting on its local plan. Wiltshire Local Plan Review process considers the level of growth in the town through to 2036, including when new homes could be allocated, and that is entirely separate from the consultation that's a subject of today's webinar, the Future Chippenham Road Route Option consultation. Any new distributor road would be subject to the outcome of future planning application and progress in the local plan review. So the next slide gives people the link to the local plan consultation. We would encourage people to take part in that consultation process as well. If we can move to the next slide. So just in terms of the background and context, Chippenham has potential for economic growth. Further housing growth around Chippenham and beyond that allocated in the Chippenham site allocation plan cannot be delivered without without necessary infrastructure. To encourage young people, we're working towards delivering a vision of a more sustainable Chippenham, which meets local needs for jobs and housing, where the community can meet its living, work and leisure needs locally. To encourage local people to choose to stay, to both live and work in the town and take up employment opportunities and access to housing and other available facilities, and also to address town centre traffic congestion. Evidence has suggested that one of the best options to deliver the vision for the sustainable future could be through the building of a significant new road to relieve through traffic and unlock potential development sites. Following a bid, Wiltshire Council was awarded a grant of £75 million from government under the Housing Infrastructure Fund. That grant could support the delivery of a new distributor road to the east and south of Chippenham, as well as making improvements to junction 17 on the M4. It could be that by 2046, up to 7,500 homes and 1 million square feet of employment space could be delivered. And of course, as we've said, that will be subject to the outcome of local plan review. Delivery of the road and associated housing infrastructure are predicated on sites coming forward as part of that review. If that does not happen, the delivery of the road and the drawdown of the £75 million funding will be at risk. Without the HIF funding and the new road, the delivery of new homes and development could be market-led and therefore lack that strategic direction. New developments could continue to be delivered in a piecemeal way. Some of the longer-term strategic highway challenges around Chippenham and junction 17 of the M4 could remain unresolved. If we can move to the next slide. So we're consulting on 3 possible road options for the distributor road. Option A, an outer route, option B, a middle route, and option C, an inner route, and also included the 2 potential link road options to Pewsham Way. The area considered for the route is between the planned Rawlings Green development in the northeast and the A350 Lackham roundabout to the south of the town, and will pass over the River Avon both north, east and south. The Future Chippenham programme is being led by the Council's Housing and Commercial Directorate, and particularly the Major Projects Enabling team. The local plan, as has already been mentioned, is a separate consultation being led by the Council's Local Planning Authority. A planning application could be made for the preferred route if sufficient progress has been made on the local plan review. The planning application will only proceed if the sites it unlocks are progressed within that local plan. The Future Chippenham programme will be making representations has made representations during the early stages of the local plan review and will be making further representations as part of that consultation. Those representations will be considered and tested by the local planning authority in exactly the same way as representations from any other interested parties. So, as has been mentioned by Richard earlier, due to the COVID-19 restrictions, the consultation is being held primarily online, is being supported by a range of online downloadable information. We can provide hard copies of consultation material, and consultation can be requested from customer services and also can be collected from the reception desk at Monkton Park office, although of course we wouldn't encourage people to engage in unnecessary travel. We ask for feedback in writing to ensure that the information is captured. There is a further public webinar being held on the 11th of February, and as Richard has already mentioned, our intention is to hold another more interactive webinar because of the nature of the demand of questions that we've experienced to date. The consultation is live and runs till Friday the 12th of March. Here's the link to the website on the council website in terms of Future Chippenham programme, and we encourage and invite people to look at that and also use the consultation survey form on that website to provide their consultation responses. I'll now hand over to Jamie and Tom from Atkins.
Good morning, everybody. So myself and Tom are going to explain a bit more about the Future Chippenham Distributor Road Options Assessment. So the Future Chippenham Distributor Road Options Assessment identifies the need for the distributor road, defines scheme objectives, and assesses route options in terms of environmental impact, deliverability, transport network impact, and value for money to identify the most appropriate route for the road. The scheme extents is shown on this particular slide. The future Chippenham distributor road options connect from the A350 or the B4528 south of Chippenham at Lackham Roundabout, and they continue east and connect to the Rawlins Green development site to the northeast of Chippenham. Now, it should be noted that the distributor road actually continues further north through Rawlins Green as a separate developer planning application, along Parsonage Way and around the north side of Chippenham, bordered by Birds Marsh, and connects to the A350 at Malmesbury Roundabout to the north of Chippenham. So this extra length that is in the grey hatch on this plan is all delivered by other developers, and it's at various stages of completion. All of the distributor road options presented for public consultation run through or around the perimeter of the residential area identified in the local plan review, and this is the hatching in yellow shown on this particular plan. So the options assessment process is shown on this slide. At the first stage, this was during the HIF bid, we undertook an options assessment that looked at ways of unlocking and enabling housing development, and the preferred option from this was the full Eastern Distributor Road. The second stage that we're working on today and presenting today is the Future Chippenham Eastern Distributor Road options assessment, and it takes forward 3 strategic objectives from the HIF bid, and these are enabling housing development by unlocking land, improving traffic congestion, ensuring the transport network has capacity to accommodate housing growth, and to provide good transport connectivity for sustainable transport between new and existing developments. We've actually split the route options into 2 option sifts. So the first option sift was looked at a higher level. We reviewed the options against the strategic objectives and also identified significant environmental, physical or land constraints that effectively would make those particular options undeliverable. So I will present them on the next slide, but we are in a couple of slides time, but actually we're not consulting on the first sift options, we're consulting on the second sift options. So the second sift options are presented for the public consultation, and they're subject to a full options assessment, and they include a preliminary environmental assessment and option cost estimates. So following today's presentation and completion of the public consultation process, there will be further updates to the options assessment report. There are ongoing discussions with landowners and developers, and a supply chain marketing event planned, and in conjunction with the public consultation feedback, that will feed in to link to a preferred route that will then go into for planning application later in 2021. So we've split the options assessment for the road routes into 5 assessment zones, and this was to provide appropriate focus and limits for fair option comparison. And the zones are defined by existing transport networks, land and developer boundaries, and locations of future development centres. Each stage of the sifting process takes forward distributor road routes within each zone, meeting the assessment criteria to pass to the next stage. And we've also included options for an additional road linking to Pewsham Way that links up with the distributor road, and they're assessed separately from the zones. So the options were generated against the following parameters: completion of a full Eastern Distributor Road route to ease transport congestion, sustainable transport connectivity, flexibility for landowner discussions, consideration of developer plans and planning conditions, and consideration of physical and environmental constraints. So the first SIFT options, just to give you a bit of the history, that the way we've looked through these are presented on this slide. So we had 6 route options within the scheme extents defined by the HIF, and 4 Pewsham Link Road options. So as I've mentioned previously, we assessed these against the strategic objectives and key physical, environmental and land constraints to ensure that they would be deliverable. So on this basis, in zone 1, we had option D, which is the yellow route, if you can see my cursor moving. So this was included in the process because there was a reserved corridor as part of the Rowden Park planning application for the Eastern Distributor Road. It actually passes through the Rowden Park conservation area, relatively close to the scheduled monument at Rowden Manor, before crossing the River Avon north of the sewage treatment works through some woodland that's there. So on the basis of cultural heritage, impact on the conservation area and impact on habitat, we've discounted that option at this stage. In zone 2, option F, which is the brown line in this plan, and equally in zone 3, reuses and doesn't introduce an additional distributor road along this section. It reuses Pewsham Way and Stanley Lane. So on that basis, it was deemed that it wouldn't give us the additional transport capacity required to ease congestion from the town centre and unlock the appropriate quantum identified in the HIF bid. So in zone 2 and 3, this particular option has been discounted. In zone 4, and actually I must point out that the key has got an error in it there. E and F should be the other way around. So in zone 4, we've discounted option E. It aligns with the National Cycle Network 403. So it would remove, by widening the embankment to put a road and cycle and pedestrian route in, it would have to remove a lot of vegetation and trees affecting habitat. So quite a large impact on the environment. So we've removed that from the assessment process on that basis. And equally, as it goes into zone 5, which is Rawlins Green, it doesn't actually follow the alignment that Rawlins Green are planning for their distributor road. So and they've made quite a bit of progress on that particular site. So we've discounted option E, as it should be, the blue line on this plan, from the process. So in zone 5, actually, we now only have one option that we've costed, but it is delivered by Rawlins Green. But it's part of the HIF bid to deliver that road route. So in terms of Pewsham Link roads, if we read them left to right, the pink one is 1, the blue one is 2, which follows Forest Lane. The orange one, which is 150 metres east of Forest Lane, is option 3, and then option 4 is the green one here. So option 2, in terms of its attributes, is very, very similar to option 3, with the exception of the fact that it follows Forest Lane, which is quite narrow. We would need to widen Forest Lane, and to do that we'd need to remove a hedge line and some trees. So it has worse environmental impact, or greater environmental impact, than option 3. So we've progressed option 3 instead. And option 4, we've looked at that as a high-level transport assessment. Part of the scheme actually looks to relieve congestion from the town, which is one of the key principles. The further you put this link road east and north, the modelling shows that actually the traffic doesn't use the alternative route as efficiently if you go with option 4. So we've removed that one from the process. So we've taken option 1 and option 3 through to the next stage. So the second SIFT options are presented on this slide. We have option A, the outer route, which runs around the outside of the residential development area identified in the local plan review. So it's likely to operate more like a traditional ring road. that particular one is 8.3 kilometres long. Option B, which is the middle route, the green mile on this particular slide, generally runs through the residential development area identified in the local plan. Could be better integrated with the development on that basis. And option C, the inner route, similar again to option B, again integrated with the residential area. That particular one is 7.3 kilometres long, and option B is 100 metres long, but at 7.4 kilometres long. So all of the options include two significant crossings of the flood zone to the River Avon. In the south, they've got different length structures. The further out you go, so A is a longer structure than B, and B is a longer structure than C. To the north, where they cross, they actually all tie into the same structure because it needs to align with the Rawlins Green Distributor Road route. So in terms of Pewsham link roads, we have option 1, which is just behind along the edge of the zone line there, which connects the Distributor Road to Pewsham Way at Canal Roundabout. And we have option 3, which connects the Distributor Road to Pewsham Way 150 metres east of Forest Lane. And there is a link on here, which I won't click now, but if you go to the consultation web page, you can review a fly through it with some commentary for each route option, and it gives you a good geographic knowledge of each particular route. So to inform a cost estimate for each option in each zone and for each Pewsham link, we've created some indicative cross sections. This particular cross section on the screen is a rural cross section, so this would be where we wouldn't have adjacent land development, but it does include a pedestrian and cycle route, and an allowance for bus networks, sustainable drainage in the form of conveyance swales, and landscape planting. So we've also created a cross section for the urban residential environment. These are houses, very simple sketch on the edge here, but these would be houses fronting on to the actual road. So you could step out your front door, have a small courtyard, but you would have cycle and pedestrian routes, immediate access to them. Again, the bus network continues, and we have sustainable drainage and landscape planting that we would use to visually narrow the road route for drivers continuing through the development to help control speed. So the third cross section that's shown considers the same features really as I've previously mentioned, but what we would consider, and this would be as a coordinated approach to the master plans for all linked developments, is an extra width cycle route, which would be separate from the pedestrian routes. So there's still some work to be done on that, but if needed and the transport assessment requires that, we could actually provide a two-way segregated cycle route through certain parts of the scheme. So in terms of the methodology for the options assessment, we have a 4-case assessment. So the strategic case, where we again use the strategic objectives from the HIF bid, all of the options that we're presenting as part of the second SIFT for public consultation meet strategic objectives 1 and 3, so they would enable the housing quantum outlined in the HIF bid, and they would also mitigate the traffic congestion. Where there is a difference in the strategic case is the connectivity objective. So each route option is geographically located in a different place in relation to existing and future developments, and indeed onwards to the town centre. So you'll see on the following slides there is a different scoring and a preferential route in terms of the strategic case on that basis. The second case is the delivery case, and at this stage, although there are some minor differences in the score and associated with letters of support from the HIF bid, there are ongoing land discussions, and really they will, and those in conjunction with the public consultation feedback, will inform an update to the delivery case prior to the summer of 2021. The third assessment case is the environmental case, which includes a preliminary environmental options assessment, a consideration of all of the categories you would expect to take forward at the planning stage for the environmental impact assessment. And the majority of this at this stage is desk-based and reviews the potential environmental impact, and the factors influencing the scoring for this are related generally to the geographical proximity of the road routes in relation to environmental features, and also the scale of the proposed road and bridge infrastructure. The fourth assessment case is the financial case. So as I mentioned previously, we've created cost estimates for each route option within each zone and each Pewsham link. Where we have a score that exceeds £25 million, which is obviously a very big figure, it scores low in the financial case assessment, and we've also looked at the affordability and the risk as a subcategory on that. Where we have long structures, they're more complex to deliver, and on that basis, they're riskier to deliver. So again, the options score lower if they're both very expensive and high risk. We would normally consider a commercial case as part of this type of assessment. At this stage, we haven't undertaken supply chain marketing or early contractor involvement, so we'll be considering including that with the options assessment update. So on the following slides, which we're about to go into each zone, Tom's going to support us in reviewing the environmental case and the financial case. So I'll move into the zones now. So zone 1, so this is to the south of Chippenham, from the Lackham roundabout end of the A350. Option C, which is the most inner route on this plan, crosses 2 public rights of way, leading up into Rowden Park and onwards into the town centre. And to the south, it heads to Lackham College and towards Laycock. So geographically, it's better located to existing developments and indeed emerging developments in this area, and proposed developments that would be towards South Chippenham. So on that basis, it's preferred in terms of connectivity. Option B and A still provide that connectivity and those links to the public rights of way, but they're not as good because effectively they're further away. There is a connectivity plan on the consultation webpage that provides 10-minute walking zones, the public rights of way, and indeed footpaths. So if you can look at that separately if you have time. So if I hand over to Tom to discuss the environmental data.
Yep, thanks, Jamie. So from an environment basis, just what Jamie touched on, we looked at all of the sort of topics that normally included in an environmental impact assessment at the planning stage, but noted on a slightly higher level, based mainly on sort of desk study information. But in this zone specifically, sort of the key factors that came into the assessment were sort of landscape and visual effects, potential cultural heritage impacts, the sort of carbon cost of the scheme, and also effects on the water environment. So I guess starting with landscape, option C and option B are both aligned a lot lower in the landscape than option A, which sort of follows a higher point to the south. The option C, sorry, does connect into sort of a high ridge line between the sewage treatment plants, which you actually can't quite see on the plan because and below Lower Lodge and above Lower Lodge. So that is more visible than option B, which when you added sort of compensatory mitigation planting would be the sort of most concealed and most visually unobtrusive option. From a heritage standpoint, option B was also preferred. This is because previous sort of archaeological investigations at Showell Farm have found some sort of interesting archaeological finds, which would put it in slightly worse risk than option B, as well as the proximity of option C to that conservation area and the potential for it to be partially within some views from the conservation area when sort of mitigations applied, although the majority of it would be screened. Similarly, option A to the south is in closer proximity to Laycock Conservation Area. That's just off the edge of this, this plan, as well as sort of archaeological assets found adjacent to sort of to Lackham College, which is at the bottom right of that image. So I think one of possibly the key point in respect of this zone was the river and the flood zone, as you can see. So as you progress southwards, the flood zone is much larger. So to avoid potential impacts on sort of the way the river flows, into the hydromorphology and also just on flooding upstream and downstream, we've proposed sort of viaducts over the river to prevent any further impacts. Obviously, this impact is worse for option A than it is for option B or option C. Option A has a viaduct of sort of 468 meters compared to a viaduct of 336 meters for option C. So there is quite a vast difference between the two. This then affects sort of the carbon cost of the scheme, the effect of construction on greenhouse gases. So generally, the longer route would be worse from a carbon perspective anyway, which option A is the longest route in this zone. But in addition to that, carbon is obviously, so concrete is incredibly carbon dense material, and because of that, and the larger viaduct structure needed for option A, that scored the worst in the assessment from sort of a construction carbon perspective. Option B was sort of the next one up, and then option C was the preferred because it's got the shortest route and it's got the shortest structure. Similarly, whilst that obviously affected the greenhouse gases element from construction, also that had an impact on the financial case. The need for the viaduct led to a much higher, a higher increase in cost of option A compared to option C and B, and that's primarily due to the longer route of the viaduct in that location, as well as the longer route anyway, considering the way it sort of moves south before turning east. So yeah, I think it's on the next slide. Oh.
Okay, sorry, there was a bit of lag there while I was changing the slides. So this in zone 2, the strategic case. So option C crosses the access road to some of the farms in here. I think there's Middle Lodge in here, and actually you can get back into Pewsham via Forest Lane, which is a public right of way, which I think is currently a bridle way there. Option B also crosses that route, and option A a bit further out, but actually there's a public right of way here that you can get back to that. So I think there's opportunities with all of them to for connectivity, but in terms of geographical location again, which we keep coming back to, option C is closer, so it's quicker to walk to Pewsham, and the centre of Pewsham is within a 10-minute walking zone of option C. And I think if you ride your bike, I think all options are probably viable to get into town from here. But I think option C is the best in terms of connectivity in this zone.
Yep. So back onto sort of environment. So you see the sort of watercourses and the viewpoints loaded onto that map there. So in respect of environment, broadly speaking, all options were similar. But I guess key points are that from a landscape perspective, option A scored significantly worse than options B and C. The reasoning for that is, again, is that option C sort of follows a higher area of land, and also then therefore remains sort of more in focus from views from Lackham College, as well as from views to the south along some of those public rights of way. So along this route, option A also has a bridge over the Wiltshire and Berkshire Canal, which, whilst included as an option, both options B and C have. That is sort of coming across that existing asset. From a heritage perspective, there was a slight preference towards option A beyond options B and C. However, there needs to be sort of it's a bit of nuance in that assessment, because that was essentially based on previous sort of archaeological investigations at and around Forest Farm, and where they'd found some sort of previous archaeology, whilst no previous studies had been done on the ground at along the option A route. So it might well be that you'd find similar finds along that option A route if investigations were to be undertaken. So from a financial case, options C and B are again shorter through this route than option A. Obviously, considering all having structures over either the Wiltshire-Berkshire Canal or a regenerated Wiltshire-Berkshire Canal, B and C are still cheaper, but the cost of option A, with the sort of always necessary bridge at Pewsham locks, does raise the cost estimate for that option. So option A was the most expensive and option C was the cheapest. Next slide, sorry.
So in terms of connectivity for zones 3, there are a number of public rights of way. We also cross Stanley Lane. There are some routes along the A4 as well. And we've got links down along Hardens Lane down to Abbeyfield School, and the National Cycle Network along the northern edge of this particular zone. So again, it's a similar story. The inner route, option C, is closer to Monkton Park via the National Cycle Network, and there's also has some good links down to Pewsham and into the town centre and some of the schools in the Pewsham area. Option B and A would still connect to the same public rights of way, but they are again further out. So option C is preferred.
So yeah, so from an environment standpoint, again, the key sort of one of the key assessments is landscape and visual effects again. So options B and C sort of follow the inside almost of a bowl, which allow the options to sort of progress through the environment and through the existing topography without being too visible, whilst option A sort of sits on the top of and slightly to the back of the hill features. That does mean that for views from sort of Derry Hill and to the east towards sort of Bram Hill, it is more visible in views, even with sort of associated landscape mitigation, so screening, planting, small mounding, etc. So yeah, potential significant visual effects there which are avoided under B and C. Option A in this route does technically have, I think, the shortest route, or pretty close to, so it would appear on the surface to be similar from a sort of greenhouse gas emissions during construction. However, as you can sort of see at the bottom, it needs to bridge sort of remaining elements of the Wiltshire-Berkshire Canal, which does make it less positive from a greenhouse gas emissions during construction, again because of that concrete usage. But also, when you consider this option, there is no sort of logical way for it to connect back into options B and C. So you kind of have to look at it from an options 3 and 4 perspective, from a carbon perspective, which, as it's a far longer option than B and C, option A is also the worst from a carbon perspective in this zone. So looking sort of in a bit more detail in respect of options B and C, option B is preferred overall environment terms to option C. The reasoning for this is whilst the landscape impacts are generally similar, the south end of option C does have a few issues for the project to overcome if it was preferred. There is, so at the moment, option C sort of progresses across the A4, sort of along the side of Stanley Park sports ground. Obviously, that would be the loss of part of that asset, which is a receptor within the population and health assessment, as well as the fact that it does sort of run straight through a pond that has records of great crested newts in that location, with Jamie sort of putting his cursor. So whilst those effects are mitigatable through production of provision of sort of new land for the sports ground and sort of new habitat for great crested newt, on the basis that avoidance of impact is always far beneficial to compensation, option B is preferred because of the impacts in that southern zone, where option B avoids those constraints. So from a financial case perspective, sort of linking back to almost the carbon assessment, really, option A was the most expensive because of the need for the structure, as well, which option B and C avoid. As well, sort of connecting into what we used as an assessment of where potential housing might go. Option A, so the concept framework, option A needed a link road back in towards that development, which would obviously increase the cost of that option. And option B would similarly need such a link back. So because of that, option C, was the preferred option from the financial case perspective. Next slide, please.
There we go. It's gone on one too many there, but that's okay. We can still see the image. So in terms of connectivity in zone 4, all options connect back to the national cycle network. So give you that link to Monkton Park and then into the town centre, which is a great existing asset. They cross, certainly option A and option B cross another 2 public rights of way that lead to some of the villages to the north and east. In terms of scoring, a similar thing again. So option C is just that bit closer to existing development, so that it scores better than the other 2 options. But the other options do have that connection. They're just further away again.
So from an environment perspective, you can see in the sort of north, northeast image, but north of this image, you can see the conservation area there, which is unfortunately very similar colour to the fields. But that's at Tiverton Lucas. So there is sort of existing sort of hillocks around Newley's farm, and sort of where the option A sort of bulbs around the outside, as you can see, as Jamie sort of cursor is pointing out now. So from Tiverton Lucas, the option A and option B to a degree would be well within views, because of the way the sort of land slopes down towards the River Marden in this location. So that doesn't necessarily make these options particularly attractive from a landscape and visual perspective, particularly option A, as it would be sort of well within views, which is sort of outside of the character of the area, because even with sort of screening vegetation, it's currently quite open agricultural landscape, and sort of putting trees and vegetation in wouldn't necessarily accord with that. So in this respect, in this landscape respect, option C manages to avoid this impact by sort of coming in behind Newley's farm before connecting into the sort of common bridge structure over the River Avon and its floodplain, which is 268 metres long. So sort of as touched upon in the last zone, option A was the worst from a carbon perspective because it's longer through this route option. Option B was sort of second preferred, and option C was the preferred, although they all have the exact same effects across the River Avon element of the works. So from a financial case perspective, Again, option A was the most expensive because of the longer route. Option C was the best, with option B coming in the middle. Yeah, so on to the next slide.
There we go. It went eventually. So Fusion link options were the next thing we looked at. So we have option 1, which connects at Canal Roundabout, and we have option 3 that connects to Fusion Way east of Forest Lane. So in terms of connectivity, I mean, they both have good connections. There is the link via Forest Lane up into Pewsham. Option 1 also connects up into Pewsham. It's actually close to the town centre, option 1, and there are probably other opportunities to potentially link in through the park into the town, depending on how the master plans evolve for the adjacent developments. So option 1 in terms of connectivity was preferred, even though option 3 actually is still a good option in terms of connectivity.
So yeah, so from an environment perspective, option 1, as you can see, sort of proceeds over a watercourse that you can just about see on that image, and then across sort of quite dense hedgerow that does connect into the ancient wood, and Jamie previously mentioned in respect of option D, which was discounted as SIF1 earlier. So that was found to have a higher environmental impact than option 3, that manages to avoid the need to cross that watercourse, as well as affecting less significant sort of hedgerows in the existing environment. But from a carbon perspective, option 1 was more expensive due to the fact that it needed to have that bridge structure to follow over that watercourse. Well, so obviously that's avoided in option 3. So option 3 was the cheaper option of the two. Next slide.
So in terms of overall assessment scoring, which is presented in this table, this table also informs options that best fit the scheme objectives and assessment criteria. So we've got the overall scores, but the green highlight really identifies the best fit options within each zone. So
James, if we could wrap up now, because we just need to make sure that we're giving some time for Q&A, and recognizing that these slides will be available on the website. So if you can draw things to a conclusion, that would be great.
Okay, I'll skip. Give me 3 or 4 minutes, Richard, and I'll be there. I'll make it quick. Right. So in terms of the strategic and delivery case, option 3 is the best fit in all zones. Option C has the lowest environmental impact in zones 2 and 4, and the second lowest in zones 1 and 3. Should be noted that in zones 2 and 3, option B is actually very similar to option C, which is what I've said, they're both best fit there. And in terms of Pewsham links, although option 1 is marginally better in terms of connectivity, on balance, considering the environmental impact, option 3 is preferred. Now the next slide presents a best fit route, which enables development, mitigates congestion, is well connected, has the lowest environmental impact and the highest value for money. So it does predominantly follow option C and Pewsham link option 3. But what we've done in zone 3, the area that Tom identified next to Stanley Park, that had an impact on Stanley Park itself and the Great Crested Newts, we've effectively in zone 3 used a combination of option B and option C. So it's option B from the A4 to Stanley Lane, avoiding the issues that we identified here, and then it's option C to connect up to the National Cycle Network. And then in terms of next steps, I just need to go back one. So we will be updating the options assessment. considering the analysis of the public consultation, landowner discussions, supply chain marketing, environmental field surveys rather than just desktop, and a flood modelling exercise. And then we'll update the cost estimates and announce the preferred route in the summer of 2021. And that's myself and Tom covered for the options assessment for now.
Great, thank you very much, Jamie. Thank you, Tom, and thank you, Simon. We've got a short amount of time left to cover Q&A. I'm conscious that we've had a significant number of questions that have come in during the presentation, as well as those that we received in advance of the presentation. So I'm going to have to kind of pick on certain questions that illustrate sort of themes that of general themes that have come out through the process, and direct them at relevant members of the panel and the team, but also stress that, of course, we will be providing further written responses to all the questions that are received, and there will be a further webinar in this format, as well as an additional webinar to deal with more interactive Q&A based webinar to acknowledge the fact that we have received such a significant level of interest in this consultation. So without further ado, I'll just go to the first question, and that is, the council's receiving £75 million from government for a new road and will be making money from the uplift in value from its land along the route of the road. Is this what is driving the project, financial benefits to the council? I'm going to put that question to Simon Hendy.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. I think there's three answers to that, really. Firstly, the council has secured the government funding and has entered into a funding cost recovery strategy with Homes England, who are managing that from the government's perspective. That includes use of the council resources, although over time the expectation is that overall the scheme would not be a cost to the council. Now, secondly, if development does come forward, the funding will enable infrastructure to be forward funded so as to help a more strategic planning, and that is one of the main driving aspects of this project. Lastly, the council will be making best use of its land and assets as part of this process, and it's required to make best use of its land and assets. If in so doing we achieve value from those assets, that value released will be used to support delivery of services to communities.
That's very helpful. Thank you for that, Simon. The next question's probably also to be directed at you, and it is, why is the council spending money on more road infrastructure rather than spending money on public transport?
Yes, thanks. Again, I think threefold answer to that. Firstly, the council secured the funding to ensure that if development comes forward, there is infrastructure in place, as I've mentioned before. The government funding is required to support development and bring forward housing in a planned and strategic way, so the council doesn't have discretion on what it spends that money on. And then thirdly, this consultation is focused on the potential road route options, and the council's wider approach to investment, for example in public transport, is a different matter and would have to be considered in the light of the council's responsibilities and budget requirements and available resources.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much for that, Simon. The next question is, I think, going to be directed at Jamie, and it's a more technical one. It says, please can you confirm how many junctions and or roundabouts and or traffic lights will be included on the Distributor road to facilitate access to or from the additional homes to be delivered?
Okay, thank you, Richard. So we have identified junctions with the existing transport network, which includes the A350 or the B4528, Pewsham Way and the A4. There will obviously be other junctions with other bits of existing network, and indeed junctions with emerging adjacent developments, but these will be considered as part of the relevant planning applications.
Okay, that's really helpful. And another one for you, and possibly for Steve Wilson as well, who's the work stream lead for road delivery at the council. The website states that the Distributor road would provide a high quality road link connecting the north, east and southern parts of the town to the A350 and improvements to junction 17 of the M4. Yet the detailed information does not seem to explain how the road connects to the A350 to Rawlings Farm and Zone 5. Whether you wanted to pick up on that.
Yeah,
Steve,
Richard. Yes, Steve Wilson here. Yeah, I think Jamie actually did quite a good job in the presentation to explain which sections of the Eastern Distributor Road are being led by other developers, and which sections are actually sort of Future Chippenham project itself. Broadly speaking, if you think of Chippenham as a clock face, from 12 o'clock due north through to around about 2 o'clock, that element of the Distributor Road is other developer led, and many aspects of that are obviously on the ground at the moment and coming forward. The residual part from 2 o'clock down to 6 o'clock is the focus of this particular scheme.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you for that, Steve. The next one is really a kind of question around the local plan, and there has been a fair amount of questions around the relationship between this consultation and the local plan that is going on separately. And I hope that we've kind of the presentation has sort of highlighted the distinction, the clear distinction between the two, and the fact this is the Future Chippenham is a project that's being promoted by the Future Chippenham team within the council, entirely separate directorate, entirely separate from the councillor's local planning authority, and treated in the same way as any other developer would be. But there's a timing issue, and so the question posed is, I'm confused about why we're being asked to consider alternatives for the route of the proposed Distributor Road before the local plan has been approved, which I understand may not be until 2023. The local plan will set a number of new houses to be built in Chippenham. This may be the 7,500 on which the plan for the Distributor Road was predicated in the HIF bid, but what if the final figure in the local plan is fewer than 7,500 and possibly considerably fewer? So I'm going to direct that question to the council's workstream lead for master planning for the programme. I think there's a straightforward answer there, but I'll ask my colleague Dave Milton to respond to that.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. It is quite a straightforward answer. It's about timing. Roads take a long time to plan and implement, as do forward plans. We can't wait for the local plan to be finalised before planning for the road, but we can work in tandem and in parallel with that. In legal terms, the local plan gathers weight the more advanced it is, and therefore we could, and it's not unusual for major infrastructure proposals to put in planning applications for roads, etc., in advance of the local plan's final adoption stages. That is legally permissible. There's a lot of precedent on that. The other issue is about the delivery. We've got a legal requirement as a local planning authority to meet identified housing needs for the area. That must be reviewed every 5 years. That doesn't stop at the end of a local plan, that carries on. And the potential is for this road to facilitate not just the next local plan's worth of housing need, but well beyond that, to provide some sort of certainty into the future where housing and growth can be accommodated successfully and sustainably in Chippenham. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dave. I do have a lot more questions that I could put to the panel, but unfortunately we are coming to the end of the time allotted for this presentation. So I think I'm just going to give my sort of concluding remarks and thanks here, and I'm very grateful to the team for putting the presentation together, and hopefully those viewing it have found it interesting and useful. There will be a recording of this webinar available on the council's YouTube channel very shortly, and there is information on how to respond to the consultation available on the website link, which is up before you there. All consultation responses must be received by no later than 5 p.m. on Friday, the 12th of March. And if you do have any further questions, can you email them to futurechippenham, one word, @wiltshire.gov.uk. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to be hosting another webinar on Thursday, the 11th of February at 7 p.m. So do please let people know about this. And we'll also be confirming details on our website by email and social media of a further webinar, as I mentioned earlier, where the format would allow more time for Q&A. So we've come to the end of our allotted time. Thank you very much for bearing with us. I hope you found this useful and look forward to receiving your thoughts and comments. Thank you.